Hi, I'm Don Knox.
And I'm Warren Pickett, and you're listening to A Shark's Perspective.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I am Kenneth Kinney, but friends call me Shark. I'm a keynote speaker, a strategist, a shark diver, host of this show, and your chief shark officer. Where and how are events evolving? It's been a roller coaster since COVID, especially when you consider production costs, travel costs, and attendees' expectations. And the ROI expectations get higher and higher as well. But creating extraordinary event experiences takes a lot of strategy, the right planning, audience engagement, great content, great speakers, and a lot more. Then you have to ask, what are you and your team doing to amplify the event experience in this brave new events world? Event industry veterans Don Knox, the Chief of Client Happiness, and Warren Pickett, the Chief Champion of Ideas, are the co-founders of Event Foundry, which helps amplify the event experience for brands that need to navigate today's events, connect buyers and sellers, make the most of limited time at an event, and effectively extend marketing and communications efforts. And on this episode, we'll discuss the events industry, what brands, media companies, biz devs, and attendees want from an event, the challenges for brands, creating a strategy for the best ROI for conferences and events, building community, the unique flavor of each conference experience, how those badges and name tags come in handy, creating memorable experiences, including with your employees, the new nimbleness of events coming faster and faster, LobbyCon, Zoom, hugging a TSA agent, force majeure clauses, Lego movies, cats and dogs living together, and a lot more. So let's tune into two events industry veterans with a shark who loves to speak at a lot of events on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Don and Warren, welcome to A Shark's Perspective. Welcome back, Warren, who was on the show way back on episode 8. But would you please, both of you, give us a brief overview of your career and background to date?
Absolutely. Shark, it's great to be on the show, and thank you for having us. I'm Don Knox, and I am one of the co-founders of Event Foundry. And, my background is in event production, event management, and event marketing. I did start out in the publishing and ad sales business way back in the day. I've been doing this for over 30 years. And as I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, a lot of publishers end up in the events business. So that's how I fell into the events business, and have been at it for quite some time. And that's a brief one for me.
Yeah. Warren, I know we've known each other for years. You hired me to be a speaker several times. What's your background?
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth, and thanks for having us back and for participating again. Just like Don, I'm a co-founder of Event Foundry, and we have a steep passion and love for everything in the event space. And Don and I actually go way back to the publishing days. So I started in publishing as well, and in the B2B media side. But I've always had a passion for kind of bringing community together, whether it's in print, online, and certainly around events. And, my background is in journalism, so I have sort of that content bent. I always look at the event as an educational experience and helping people to really gain insight into what's happening in an industry with the trends, with the competition, and certainly bringing people together through networking and those opportunities.
Well, so we'll start off with questions that I want to ask you as part of the show. I think this also is very important to me as a speaker, somebody that's been in the speaking business for a while, somebody that's been helping plan events and doing these things as well. And I think this is a wonderful topic that affects a lot of people, whether you're on the brand side, an agency side, professional speaker like me, or wherever you are in the world. But let's talk, Warren, kind of tell us where you think events are evolving and what's changed after COVID.
Yeah, it's certainly been a roller coaster kind of going through COVID and coming out the other side. I think the technology has changed a lot, and it's sort of rapidly, changed. People for a long time saw events as pretty cut and dry, that you would have this cookie cutter approach. You would always do things the same way year after year and attract the same audience. And I think one thing COVID taught us was that people became much more digital savvy. They became to have higher expectations when it comes to their time and where they're spending it. And so I think event producers have had to become a lot more in tune to what the customers want. What do the attendees look for in their events? Are they willing to travel? Are they doing a hybrid or a virtual, engagement versus just an in-person model? And again, kind of going back to COVID, I think in all aspects of life, the attendee behavior shifted, right? We saw people just becoming much more comfortable doing business online, jumping on, video calls. They started to want to have deeper, richer experiences, whether that was at, online at the grocery store, buying a pair of sneakers, or certainly at events. They wanted more, to walk away from an event with. But I think we've also come out of it, going into sort of the inflationary times that we now live in. We came out of COVID and people became much more cost conscious. They become a little bit more travel reticent unless it's absolutely necessary. And so I think, between the technology and the way that event producers can now provide an offering that is much more enriched, but also trying to understand and meet the attendees' expectations for what that would look like.
Well, speaking of attendees' expectations, let me tell you my thoughts too, because the way I see coming out of, let's say, when things started to open back up in the latter half of 2022 and beyond, people aren't as excited about getting on a Zoom virtual conference. Maybe they love that in 2020, but you see the appetite for people being back in person. And the technology can also be expensive for people to put on a hybrid event or a virtual event. It can be, to do it well, it goes way beyond just everybody jumping on a Zoom call. So how do you sort of tackle that? Because while the technology's caught up, there's a cost, and then there is the appetite there for people to really be in person or watching online.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, I think it comes down to what are those expectations, both from the attendee, but also from somebody who is exhibiting or sponsoring an event. Certainly it comes down to, am I seeing the return on my investment, on my money, on my time? And, if you're providing something that is a must attend and people really see the value and understand that they're able to get out of it what they want to, then virtual or a hybrid model works really well. But a lot of times, we miss the handshake, we miss the hugs, we miss those personal moments that we can get at an in-person event. And it doesn't always translate, obviously, to an online only offering.
Yeah, I think I hugged the TSA agent at the first time I was traveling to go back to an in-person event. So hugs and high fives were well ready for my thoughts. Well, Don, let's talk about what the challenges are that brands have with participating in events, other than, just the economics. I know everybody, as Warren just said, is thinking about the ROI, but everybody and their grandmother was really throwing together an in-person event. And now they're having to really rethink that, not only from a cost perspective, but whether or not they have the people, because a lot of those event planners, they all got laid off. I mean, a lot of them changed, took grown-up jobs or did something else.
Right.
But you don't necessarily have the same back-end structure that you did, and whether or not brands can afford to do it or want to do it. I've seen a lot of people start to move those to virtual events just to have something. But really, when you think about it, the value for the brand also have to think about truly what's the value for the attendee.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, Kenneth. It's a lack of bandwidth and resources for sure. Knowing that, you've got to put an actual strategy behind this, at least, from a brand perspective. If you're going to invest this amount of money in participating in an event, whether it's a hybrid or it's, in person or otherwise, it takes time to really invest and make sure that you've got adequate support and adequate resources internally. And I mentioned strategy because that's a lot of times, one of the last things that sadly a lot of brands think of and think about, in advance of planning for their appearance or attendance or exhibition at an event. It's, they get into this kind of autopilot mode. But I think, everybody's being much more cognizant of the fact that, okay, events are coming back, so we're really needing to take this a little bit more seriously. Even though we have fewer resources, let's try to figure out exactly what kind of ROI we can expect from an event.
I love the point on strategy. How do you help somebody sort of plan together a strategy so that you think about an event rather than just sending a dozen different biz dev people to come back with some leads?
Yep. Which is what, sending the wrong people has been
Right.
a, classic mistake for forever. We've all walked by the booth where the guy or gal is, playing a game on their phone or whatever. They're just not engaged.
Well, here's one more. The group that Warren used to work for, they had a website that had, and a lot of companies like this have websites where they'll produce a letter for you that you can present to your boss and say, here's why this event is good for you. And then you put your name and, sign it and email it on to whoever it is. And I was thinking about that with strategy. That strategy looks much different as to what I would get as an attendee or what a business would get anymore. So how do you help them plan for that?
Yeah. So, well, that's really what our whole company is based on. I mean, we created this agency to try and help brands get the most out of their present. We call it amplifying the event experience, which really just means, you've got to take this seriously. That these costs are significant. And, we try to work with everyone, whether you're an exhibitor or a sponsor, or if you're just attending to network, really. What type of focus do you have on setting the stage, literally, figuratively and literally, for being at the event and getting the most out of it? Pre-promotion is a huge thing. Obviously, on site, you want to make sure that you have a strategy of, a classic example is, as an attendee, you want to make sure that your boss knows that you are going to visit these 12 clients who have exhibits, right? And you better make sure that you go to those booths and come back with something meaningful. We want to arm everyone, whether you're an exhibitor or a sponsor or an attendee, to make sure that you're prepared and that you've got a plan of action. Essentially, we try to shine a spotlight on every aspect, every step of the process.
Sure.
And make sure that you're thinking, that brands are mainly thinking about, what are they going to actually get out of it?
Well, Warren, you're a veteran of the events industry. What are the challenges that you really see these people facing today when pulling together events, especially when compared to what you were doing a few years ago, running an event?
Yeah, and I think things have definitely changed, regardless of kind of how you touch events and what role you play. I think, just the entire environment has changed and shifted since COVID. We talked about it, the economics obviously earlier, but the cost of everything just continues to increase. And that flies in the face of a lot of brands, a lot of companies where their budgets continue to shrink. We read almost daily about companies that are tightening their strings. They're in some cases laying off staff. And so they have less to work with. They have to make more out of the resources they have. So I think that's one big challenge that brands have is how do you get the most out of the resources that you have and use those wisely when you're thinking about your event strategy. I think, for every type of event producer is kind of looking at the fall and thinking, okay, what's it going to be now that we've gotten past COVID? We've all had multiple boosters. We're now looking at variants. We are now potentially looking at new viruses that are coming out. It presents a landscape of uncertainty to some extent. And so as we go into the fall and winter, certainly the event cycle in the fall, I think, the challenge is how do you make sure that you plan an event that people are going to attend, that people feel safe and comfortable attending, and not risking themselves, not risking their family to any sort of exposure that they're going to take home. And, that goes back to obviously the beginning of COVID when we first started to see this happen. And we're all a little bit better armed. We're a little bit better prepared. But I think health and safety is definitely a challenge. It's definitely a concern that we'll continue to face for, the near future. For anybody who has traveled this summer, I think people understand that air travel is not quite as fun as it sometimes has been in the past. And, you know, for somebody who is having to hop on a plane, having to rent a car, having to, you know, arrange a hotel room, there has to be a little bit more planning, a little bit more forethought into what you're doing so that you don't end up stranded somewhere. I had a former colleague who literally just traveled cross country and it took him 20 hours to get home from an event. So, you know, I think people definitely in the back of their minds, they're having to take into consideration kind of, okay, I have to be at this event. I know I want to go, I want to be there, but I've got to make sure I do it wisely, you know, to avoid anything that doesn't need to happen. The last thing I would throw in there is just, you know, kind of from an event producer standpoint, we knew that when kind of COVID started to look a little bit under control and things started opening up again, the people were sort of chomping at the bit to get back together. They were looking for opportunities to get out and experience things again. And that's locally from going to a restaurant or going to a concert. But it also meant, you know, from a business standpoint of going to events again. And so, you know, there was this mad dash to try and find venues and secure space and do all of that. And obviously that's changed a little bit. But Kenneth, as a professional speaker, you know that events go through cycles. You definitely see that those spring events, you see those fall events, and a lot of times things fill up quickly. And it can be a challenge for the event producers just to make sure that they have all the pieces in place to make sure that their event is successful, that they meet their customer, you know, expectations, whether that's the attendees or the exhibitors and sponsors, and that everybody has a good experience so that they can say, hey, let's do this again soon, right?
I think of so many things dating back to the good old days of 2019.
Yeah.
Back when there
The
wasn't
good old
hand
days.
sanitizer at every event, you know, all the lunches weren't hermetically sealed.
Right.
Yep.
And when most of the world who was going to an event didn't understand what a force majeure clause was, you know,
Right.
now that's
Right.
common knowledge to everybody who's had to argue with a hotel or venue as to what's going to happen. If you just think of a tornado going through the lobby, that's one thing. Oh, COVID, that'll never happen.
Right.
And then we had it. So Don, how does Event Foundry come into the picture to help your clients with addressing a lot of that?
Yeah, well, I touched on this a little bit earlier. We are there to shine a spotlight on every step of the process as companies are trying to plan for their presence at an event or at a conference. So ideally, Event Foundry comes into the picture early, working with a team that is trying to prepare. So pre-show promotions, you know, I mean, a lot of these things are kind of low-hanging fruit. Most companies know they have to do a lot of these things. Whether they're done very well or efficiently or comprehensively is another question. So we come in as a resource, as an agency service and resource to help them really nail down what those promotions are going to look like, what that messaging is going to look like, to make sure that they're reaching out to the right audience with the right message in order to get the right audience and the right, you know, attract the right audience to the event. A lot of brands leave it up to the event organizer and call it a day. You know, there are of course other shows that are more buyer seller driven, and brands are very focused on making sure that they get the right buyers there, you know, to attend the show, and they base their success on the number of deals that they're closing or number of transactions that they're completing at the event. But we come in to help with all of that marketing and messaging pre-show. During the show, we're also a resource to, again, make sure that, you know, salespeople are taking full advantage of what's happening. You know, we offer sales training. We offer all the on-site promotion material and collateral that you would expect to have. We handle producing media kits and, you know, all types of collateral that you might need. And then of course, post-show is probably the area where most companies falter the most, which is, you know, everybody's exhausted, everybody gets back and they're like, you know, I got my business cards, I did my job. But that's really where, the results begin to happen. And you want to make sure that, you're focused on analyzing the metrics, looking at how much actual ROI you're getting out of the event, and to continue that dialogue with everyone that you've met, and make sure that it just doesn't stop at the end of that show, with your final cocktail in the bar, in the lobby. You want to make sure that dialogue and relationship building and really community building begins. I mean, we look at it, we approach it from that perspective. Like, every brand is trying to build a community, or at least they should be looking at it that way. It's not just, how many deals did I close or how many cards did I collect, but are you thinking about all of those months in between the first and the second show, or, the show that you were just at and the next show? And a lot of companies do so many, they can't even begin to wrap their brain around all of that. And that gets back to the resources issue. But, we come in, especially with companies that are lacking in those resources, that might have smaller staffs, that might have, a founder or a president who's wearing the marketing hat and the PR hat and the, every other hat, and really try to come in and pick up that slack and just make sure that we help them.
The way I set this up earlier, I was sort of thinking about how a lot of us are looking for events to come back, but it takes momentum, and it's going to take a lot of momentum to get 23 and beyond back to where 2019 was. A lot of people say it'll never get back to the way it was. But what do you think the advantages are of participating in the market where we are today, whether it's virtually or in person, to turn out a greater event than you necessarily had before?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kenneth. And it takes me back to a conversation I think Don and I had a couple of weeks ago. We were talking to a fellow industry colleague, and I felt he really nailed it on the head when he said, events give you an opportunity that no other marketing, no other advertising, no other promotion is going to give you. You really get, obviously, the face-to-face time, right? Hopefully you're there in person, but at least hybrid or virtual, but you're getting some sort of connection with people. And like Don said, as a brand, you should be trying to build your own community. And that's the first, stepping stone to do that. Companies have to be present and be in it to win it, sort of. They've got to take that attitude that if they're not there, and let's say their competitors are there, they're missing out. They're not taking advantage of an opportunity that the industry has given them. There are so many types of events that are out there, some that are produced by associations, some that are produced by publishers, some that are, entirely brand driven. But each one of them has a different opportunity that it presents for an exhibitor, for a sponsor, for an attendee, to really engage with the industry, right? But you've got to be there. You've got to have a presence to it. I think one of the big advantages of being at an event is it kind of levels the playing field. It gives you insight into what are your competitors doing. You can see that firsthand. You can, depending on the relationship you might have with your competitor, you can go over and talk to them, but you can at least walk by their booth. You can see what they're doing, who they're attracting, what are their giveaways, what literature are they putting out there in the market, and understand their products and services. And, yes, you can go surf somebody's website, but you're not going to get the same insight that you would at an event about what the competition is doing. And likewise, the events, personally, from my own standpoint, I always love the educational side, but I love to hear about the trends. I love to hear about what are the insights, what are, the industry stats, where are people being educated, and what is changing in the industry that is sort of driving the conversation today and will be driving the conversation tomorrow. So I always love for people to take advantage of the educational side of events, whether it's a trade show or a conference, so that they really can, walk away feeling that they've learned something, but they're more empowered to take their business forward. And then, we know, Kenneth, that B2B, lead generation takes a long time. It's not something that is transactional. It's something that you've got to build, you've got to nourish, you've got to create those connections. And I love going to events, especially ones that you've been to before, because you do start to see familiar faces, right? There's always going to be somebody that you knew that was there last time. You can go up and maybe it's been 6 months or maybe it's been a year since you've seen them. But again, you're excited to see them. You're excited to have a quick conversation with them because you know it might be another few months before you connect with them again. The more you can sort of take those opportunities, take those moments and build those relationships and make them stronger and stronger, then the better your business is going to be. Again, you're trying to create a positive experience for your business, and events give you that opportunity, that advantage that you don't have anywhere else.
The great part of them as well is I don't have to remember anybody's name, because if they're wearing a
There's
badge,
a name tag.
there's the name
badge
tag, and
right
I can
there.
stop calling everybody sport and pal. But I think
Gold
it's
lanyard.
exactly. I think it's fascinating how each event has its own flavor, its own experience.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even the attendees, it doesn't matter if it's totally different industries, just to watch people in general, the way they function, move around, interact with each other, interact with vendors that may be there if the show has sponsors. It's fascinating to see each of that. But Don, you touched on this a little bit earlier. Where do you sort of see an opportunity for companies to improve the engagement? Because there are a lot of people that sit in the corner at a conference, and then there's ones where the audience attendees are as vested as the people on stages often are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to say, you just reminded me of a convention. I don't even know if that term is relevant anymore.
Yeah.
But it was, yeah, I think about that because there still are companies with convention in their name. But I just took my son to a Lego convention or a Lego show, and he's been a huge Lego fan ever since he was tiny. And he is about to turn 17. And believe it or not, still carves out time in his day to build things and play with these things. And my wife and I love it because, he just still enjoys it so much.
I got a child. It gives me a great excuse to go play with him and blame it on him. So
yeah, exactly. That's the way it should be. But, you just made me think about that show because the audience was so different and unique. And obviously the exhibitors in this particular event were the builders, these unbelievably creative people from all over the world that have spent, I assume, the past year building these unbelievable, interactive, in some cases, Lego constructions, and just so incredibly cool. And we've been for like 3 years in a row, and it just every year and they canceled, of course, last year, but it was fun to get back to that. So just speaking of uniqueness and unique experiences on both sides, on the exhibit and the attendee side. But to answer your original question, I think it is what I mentioned earlier. It's really focusing on starting the conversation before you get to the event and understanding that dialogue is important to the final analysis, or in the final analysis of what did we get out of this event? Will we do it again? Will we spend more? Will we spend less? Are we going to scratch it off our list and move on? But making sure that if you've already made the decision to be there, and we all know between travel costs and everything else, these are significant chunks of budget that go to even the smallest events. You've got to think about that conversation. And again, the community building aspect of it, and just looking at it as we are going to try to get as much out of this as possible, but really focus on what is going to happen when this event is over. Am I still going to be in touch with these people? The folks that I've met that I could see myself perhaps even being friends with or spending time outside of work with. We meet some amazing people, at work and at trade shows and conferences. And I've made some lifelong friendships from doing it for so many years. But again, thinking about it strategically in advance so that you are clear on what your goals are, you're clear on your messaging, and you're clear on what, the outcomes should be. In addition to that, I think it's, personalization and making sure that you create a memorable experience, obviously from a brand or exhibit or sponsor perspective. That's what I'm mainly referring to. And yes, you've got everybody from, the 10 by 10 booth, which they might have nothing more than a chair and a pedestal in there, to the 3-story, crazy booth from the big brands. But whatever it is that you're doing, you've got to try to make sure that at least you're doing something that is identifiable to your brand, is memorable, to your brand, and that you've actually taken the time to understand that you are ready to make an impact, that you're not just there to, shake hands and move on, that you're actually there to make an impact.
I really like, especially with brand events, when it's not just your pageant to show all your fun stuff, and it's not just all your VP of sales who's strictly up there from a transactional standpoint, but you get to sometimes connect with the engineers or the customer service people.
Right.
And that becomes really part of the experience of meeting the person that sends you these bills. Maybe it's the billing department, and you can have a conversation and connect with the brand maybe more holistically than just through a transactional relationship alone. And there's a real value there. I've seen it quite a few events and been on both sides of that aisle. But, one of the biggest issues, Warren, I think when we kind of pivot off engagement, is to think of the lack of engagement with the most famous conference of all time, and that's LobbyCon, where all of those folks that aren't engaged enough are engaged when they're out in the hotel lobby or bar or the Starbucks at the end of the hotel, and they're setting up meetings, but they're not participating in events.
Yeah.
And it becomes a real problem for all kinds of conferences and trade shows and expos. A lot of the ones that have heavy vendors, of course, these kind of shows, it becomes detrimental, may not be the right word, but it takes away from the experience of the event for the attendees, for the event producers, for a lot of different people. But that's not an easy problem to tackle, especially when the bar or the lobby or the Starbucks is a stone's throw from the conference hall and maybe the speakers aren't great.
Right.
So how do you sort of help address some of that?
Yeah. And Kath, I think is definitely the biggest problem facing events today and has been for a long time is how do you address getting people in, participating in that community and not just surfing on the edges. I think a lot of times people don't realize or don't keep in mind that, most events are profitable. You don't see very many nonprofit events out there. And so for these publishers, for these associations to produce events, that benefits everybody. It benefits the industry as a whole. And, as we know, and as we've experienced, there are a lot of industries out there that have multiple events provided by multiple, event producers. And whether it's social media, whether it's email marketing, whether it's performance marketing, you have people who should be and will be supporting sort of the best events out there, right? But for those events to really thrive, for them to stick around, they need the support of the industry. And, I think when you think about the bigger picture, it's that these brands hopefully realize that, the event is there for the industry to support the industry. But that means that they're part of the industry, and ultimately these events are helping them as a company succeed, right? So if you're not participating in the event, if you're just hanging out in the lobby and catching people as they pass down the hallway, you're not really helping your brand. You're not helping your company. If you're participating in the event, yes, you can, provide feedback on the speakers. You can, focus on where you're getting the most value out of the event. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're really doing something that is benefiting everybody. It's kind of the whole thing of a rising tide, lifts all boats. And that's what you're doing by participating in the event. That doesn't mean you have to spend an exorbitant amount of money, buy a pass, buy a ticket to the event. But it doesn't mean you have to purchase a 20 by 20 booth. It doesn't mean that you have to sponsor the $45,000 cocktail hour. But finding a way just to give back a little bit goes a long way. It also ingratiates yourself with the event producers, and you'll find that most event producers really appreciate that. They're going to go out of their way to help you be successful if you're helping the event be successful.
Yeah, and I think the more knowledgeable attendees become, especially ones that have money to spend,
Right.
It's got to be profitable to them and the audience to really have a relationship that goes beyond just the bar. I mean, I got to be honest, I was thinking about this before with LobbyCon. If I had two vendors and one of them was a sponsor and was more vested in the show versus one who just wanted to be in the bar and pick up my tab, great. I'll have a drink with you. But at the same time, if I go see, the A-list speaker up there and it's crickets in there because everybody's hanging out in the bar, it becomes not profitable to the attendees. And I think that's
Right.
something that's got to be addressed. I think there's going to be a challenge for hotels. I mean, right now, if I was considering different venues to put on an event, I'd want to start thinking about how close is the hotel bar?
Sure.
Because I remember going to an event a few years ago where I went and saw the speaker. Was not hardly anyone in there watching the speaker. Then I went down to the expo hall. There was not hardly anyone down at the expo hall. I went to the bar to meet two other people, and there were 1,000 people there. And it was insane seeing everybody crammed in there. And that's not necessarily the fault of sometimes putting together better content. It's thinking about better ways to structure how somebody gets through the hotel to where the meeting hall or the expo hall is. And it's something to really think about. Well, another thing, and I think about this a lot as a speaker, it used to be that people were 6 months plus going to events, and this is how everything would structure. You're planning out your content 6 months plus down the road.
Mhm.
That's changed. And that has changed a lot. I've gotten a lot of speaking gigs where it was a month or even less. And it's, you got to go book a plane trip. Let's get the contract executed. The consideration's all done really quickly. Don, when you think about the companies that you're dealing with, they're not necessarily taking, because nobody knows what's going to happen a year from now anymore. We could have another variant of, the R2D2 variant comes out, who knows, and it changes the whole game again. So how do you help people sort of address being nimble in this market so that they can pull together a great event quickly or plan it out with the right strategy?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and definitely something that's we're seeing so much more of. And I think it's just really staying in touch with what's going on in the industry that you're involved in, and just making sure that I mean, it's kind of going back to what I've been saying about community building and continuing the dialogue, and just making sure that you're in touch and aware of the changes that are happening in your industry. I mean, everybody reads the trades, everybody gets their email newsletters in their inbox, but is it going beyond that in terms of really garnering and gathering intel from the folks in your network to understand where the wind might be blowing? Not everybody has time to do that, and everybody has what they're actually paid for at the end of the day. But being nimble is definitely a requirement. It's a prerequisite, but not everyone naturally falls into that mindset, and it's very tough for a lot of people. And people that are, I mean, I consider myself to be a pretty good planner just in general. So, if I'm throwing a curveball at the last minute in any situation, I'm usually like, oh God, this is throwing off my whole process. Now what do I do? But we're all getting better at it. I think it's just kind of, what's happening I mean, COVID taught us a lot, for better or for worse.
Don, I think that's a great point, is that it's not just about the event industry, Kenneth. It is about every part of life. We've all had to become much more nimble, whether it's dropping off the kids for soccer practice, whether it's going to the grocery store, whether it's, going to a trade show or an event. And so, having that mindset of planning, for the best, but obviously preparing for the worst, I think a lot of times that's what it comes down to.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I asked this of all of my guests. I didn't get to ask this of Warren back on episode 8, but I asked this of everybody now. My nickname is Shark. I've been swimming with sharks since I was a kid, but I'm going to ask each of you, start with you, Don. What is your favorite kind of shark and why? You're not too far from a lot of sharks.
Oh man. Yeah, what a good one. Yeah, you're throwing me off with that one, even though I should have seen it coming. I'm afraid of sharks. I mean, you're a great guy, but I'm generally afraid of sharks. My favorite shark. that would require me to have more knowledge than the great white. I'm a real big fan of whatever the shark was in Jaws. I'm a huge movie guy, so
That's a
Great white.
one.
Well, you're
Was
not
that a
that
great
far.
white?
The Farallon Islands are what, 45 miles off the coast of San Francisco. So you can
right.
occasionally find some great whites here in another couple of months out that way. So
Okay.
Warren, how about you? There's not a lot in the Colorado area.
We don't have a lot of sharks here.
A lot of
no.
mountain
We-
sharks.
We
Yeah.
tend to stay away from them. I would have to say probably a hammerhead, Kenneth, in part because I've talked to you about them before.
Mhm.
I think they're just obviously unlike any other shark you're going to see in the water. They're just very different looking, but I just like them. I think they're unique. I think they're cool to look at. So yeah.
That is a cool shark.
They're fantastic. All right. Well, gentlemen, it is that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Sure.
Oh yeah.
All
Let's do it.
I'm gonna round robin these a little bit, and I'll ask you each one, and then question 5 you'll both answer.
Okay.
All right. Number 1, Don Knox. Sounds like Don Knotts. We're going to talk about knots.
Don,
Windsor or a bow tie?
I'm sorry. Repeat that.
Windsor or a bow tie?
Oh, Windsor or bow tie. I love that. Windsor all the way.
All right. Perfect.
Absolutely.
All right. Warren, number 2. Would you rather plan an event in Vegas or Orlando?
Oh man, that whole question comes down to the time of year because of the humidity level and the weather. I've actually participated in events in both locations. I've only planned events in Vegas, not in Orlando. But I would say based on my familiarity and knowing that there's so much variety in Vegas, I would have to say Vegas. And it's closer to home.
Yeah. Makes
Only
sense.
the consideration.
All right. Number 3, Don, you mentioned your son's love for Legos. So I'm going to ask you about Lego movies.
Oh.
Lego Batman or Ninjago?
Ooh. I would have to go Lego Batman.
I assumed you'd seen both of them since your son
Yes.
is into Legos. So
Yes. And of course, the Lego movie is a all-time fave as
Yeah.
well. But yes, Lego Batman, I've seen many, many times and love that one.
All right. Number 4, Warren, this one's going to be way too easy for you.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
Cats or dogs?
Oh, that's a no-brainer
Or-
right there, Kenneth.
Or
Well, it depends because you do have a lot of this pet in your house. So
We
that
do.
may not necessarily be a plus.
We actually have cats and dogs and lizards in my house. I'm looking at one of our lizards right now.
One that hasn't been eaten by the cat. So
That's right. Kenneth, I think you know that we do a lot of foster care.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
so we foster mostly cats and kittens, although we had puppies this week. But yes, definitely cats and kittens would be the favorite.
all right. Number 5, and the most important question that both of you are going to be asked today. And Don, we'll start with your answer first, is biscuits or cornbread?
Oh,
Ooh. My wife does an amazing job with both of those. That is, I'd have to go.
Now she's going to be mad at you for whatever you do.
I know, right? I'd have to say cornbread. I'm from the South, and I had a lot of it back in the day, and I still love it. But yeah, cornbread,
Warren, how about you?
jalapeno cornbread.
Yeah.
Oh,
Actually,
jalapeno is
too.
even better. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say the same. Probably cornbread over biscuits.
Perfect. Well, Don and Warren, thank you so much for being on the show. Where can people find out more about both of you, find out about what you're doing with Event Foundry, and keep up with your thought leadership in the space and more?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find us at eventfoundry.net on the web, and we're very proud of our website. So please check it out, and you'll learn everything you'd ever want to know about what we can do to help you amplify your event experience.
Awesome. Don and Warren, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Thank
Always
you,
great
Kenneth.
to see you.
Yep, it was a lot of fun, Kenneth.
So there was my conversation with event industry veterans Don Knox, the Chief of Client Happiness, and Warren Pickett, the Chief Champion of Ideas and they're the co-founders of Event Foundry, which helps amplify the event experience for brands that need to navigate today's events, connect buyers and sellers, make the most of limited time at an event, and effectively extend marketing and communications efforts. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with them. First, events have to change, and a lot of that change is also due to customers' expectations. We want deeper experiences that are richer, but cost is an issue for brands sending employees, and hopefully it's the employees who get more engaged with the content, learn, but also take advantage of the chance to connect with other people moving the needle. Though, what is a must-attend conference anymore? We do miss the hugs and handshakes, but we expect more, and that doesn't always translate to what is being produced. And brands have to challenge themselves, just like they do with their brand messaging and positioning, to be something different. It's a real opportunity to differentiate yourself from your competitor, build a community in so many ways. You should take advantage of it before they buy from someone else with better hors d'oeuvres. Okay, they won't just buy because of better hors d'oeuvres, but make sure you have plenty of shrimp for me, please. Second, as Don talked about strategy, it's a great reminder for you to make certain to take another look at your strategy for your event. He said that we get into autopilot mode, but as events are coming back, your strategy has to better evolve to stand out, as well as rethink your own expectations about what the ROI should be for you. Think about it and do it early. Third, LobbyCon is a real issue. Lots of people simply looking to get leads and send their people to events, often without buying a ticket, to basically hang out in the lobby and set up meetings with buyers outside of the event, either in the lobby at a bar or restaurant or coffee shop nearby. But it takes away from the event when those people aren't part of the event, the content, the expo halls, etc. It hurts the event organizers from a revenue standpoint. I just hate that it deters from the energy of the event when basically the BizDev folks sit outside and have no contribution to the rest of the conference. I'm trying not to buy or engage from anyone that's a LobbyConist. I hope you won't either. There is a value in having them be engaged without only being transactional. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time, and I'm so thankful to everyone who listens. Please consider writing a review and letting me know your thoughts on the show. I'm off to deliver another keynote, get engaged with the audience, and stay away from those LobbyConists. Let's keep swimming and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.